1915, the Gallipoli Peninsula. Here, the earth had forgotten its own name. It was now called mud, blood, and iron. The air in the trenches was a heavy mixture of rusted metal, gunpowder, antiseptic, and the cloying, sweetish stench of decay that overpowered everything else. If the days were a vigil, the nights were a whisper. The muffled cough of distant artillery, the endless groans of the wounded echoing in the labyrinthine trenches, and the scurrying of rats in the walls, bolder even than death, formed a sinister symphony. In the heart of this hell, within the trenches of the 57th Regiment, there was talk of a spectre. He was not a living man, but a secret that walked among them. Everyone called him Kara Mehmet. Mehmet's silence was not the silence of an empty room. It was the unnerving quiet of a forest before a storm, of a volcano on the verge of eruption. No one knew where he came from or who he was. Not a single meaningful word was heard to have passed his lips since he joined the front. It was as if he had buried his words along with his memories somewhere in the snowy mountains of the Balkans. His eyes, his steel-gray eyes, were far too old for a man in his 20s, as if they had witnessed everything they were never meant to see. In those eyes, there was no fear, no anger, no joy, only a detached observation that weighed and measured everything, piercing deep into one's soul. In the midst of the roaring madness of war, he lived behind an unshakable wall of silence he had built around himself. This quality set him apart, turning him into a legend. But at night, this legend became the regiment's deadliest weapon. Kara Mehmet was as silent as a cat, as invisible as the darkness that enveloped him. His steps did not bruise the earth. His breath was unheard. That is why the most dangerous, most impossible missions always fell to him, to infiltrate enemy lines like smoke, to slither under barbed wire like a serpent, and to return with the secrets of the Anzac trenches. The other soldiers spoke of him with a mixture of respect and a shiver of dread. When he sat in a corner of the trench, in the shadows, sharpening his rusted bayonet, an invisible circle formed around him. Whispers would begin. They say he lost his entire family in the Balkan War, right before his eyes. He buried his tongue in the ground with them that day. Another, an older corporal, would say, "No, this man was a hunter in the mountains. He spoke with bears and wolves. He has forgotten the language of men and learned the language of the wind." There was only one person who dared to breach this invisible circle every day, relentlessly: Ali, a fresh-faced young man from Konya, still carrying the scent of the plains and warm bread, his mustache barely there. In Ali's eyes shone the hope of life, not the grime of war. He was not afraid of Mehmet's silence. On the contrary, he was curious about the river that flowed beneath the frozen lake, the man behind the silence. He would come to Mehmet every day to share a piece of his hardtack or a sip of water, giving life to Mehmet's silence with his own words. "Lost in thought again, eh, brother?" Ali would say, crouching beside him and offering his canteen. Mehmet wouldn't turn his head, but he would accept the offered water and take a sip. This was the language between them,
one's words, the other's acceptance. My mother used to say, it's the quiet ones you have to watch out for. Whatever kick you've got, it's making all the Anzacs tremble.
Mehmet would not answer. He would only listen. His eyes would be on the steel of his bayonet, but his ears would be with Ali. Ali spoke of his fiancée, Ayşe. He would pull out a black and white photograph, its edges worn from sweat and mud. "Look, brother, isn't she beautiful? Her eyes are like a gazelle's. We'll have our wedding after the war, under the biggest plane tree in the village. 3 days and 3 nights. I'll invite you too. You'll have the seat of honor. You'll be talking by then, won't you? Or my Ayşe will be cross." As Ali spoke, sharp, painful sparks from Mehmet's own past would flash in his mind. A plane tree in his own village in the Balkans, the smiling face of a woman beneath it, the laughter of a small child. Then all of it would vanish into fire and smoke. Without knowing it, Ali was touching Mehmet's deepest wounds. Perhaps Mehmet saw in Ali's relentless life force a piece of his own innocence, once possessed and now lost forever. That evening, when Captain Tahsin summoned them to his makeshift headquarters of mud and timber, everything changed. By the light of a flickering gas lamp, he spread a map before them. His weary finger pointed to a hill. "Look, gentlemen, the enemy has established a new machine gun nest on this hill, just above Lone Pine. Our men call it Hell's Torment. It has our entire trench, our entire supply line under fire. We lost 3 more good men last night because of it. Tonight, you will infiltrate their line, pinpoint the nest's exact location, the number of soldiers, and if possible, its weak point." The captain's gaze rested first on Ali's anxious young face, then on Mehmet's expressionless one. "No one can do this but you two. The wind is on our side tonight. The moon will be behind the clouds. Especially you, Kara Mehmet. Your silence could win us the lives of 100 men." The mission was a cold death sentence. But this was only the beginning of the true horror Kara Mehmet would experience that night. As night fell like ink, the 2 soldiers slipped out from a loophole at the far end of the trench. First, they crawled under the barbed wire like snakes at the cost of tearing their uniforms. Then they set foot in the terrible terrain known as No Man's Land. This land belonged neither to the Turks nor the Anzacs. It was the kingdom of death alone. The landscape had been rendered unrecognizable by months of bombardment, turning the face of nature into a grotesque mask. It was pockmarked with shell craters, like the mouths of giant monsters. Mehmet was in the lead. His body moved as an extension of the earth. In this terrain he knew by heart every step, every pause was calculated. His eyes, like an owl's, pierced the darkness, instantly catching the slightest movement, the faintest glint of moonlight on a piece of shrapnel. Ali was his shadow. He tried to suppress the sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs, stepping where Mehmet stepped, listening to his breath. Every few minutes, a flare launched from the Anzac trenches would tear the night apart with a terrible white light. In those moments, time would freeze. The 2 soldiers would become as rigid as statues, a part of the gruesome landscape of rotting corpses, shattered equipment, and nature's desperate attempt to reclaim the desecrated land. The light briefly illuminated the lifeless, skyward-gazing eyes of a young Anzac soldier. Ali flinched. Mehmet didn't even blink. He had long grown accustomed to this sight. When the light died, they would melt back into the shadows. Hours passed like a century. They crawled. They hid, sometimes passing right next to a decaying body,
trying not to hear the prayer he must have uttered with his last breath. At last, they reached the hill. The machine gun nest, cleverly concealed in a rock indentation, was right in front of them. From behind a bush, Mehmet began to study the nest with a small pair of binoculars he pulled from his pocket. 2 Vickers machine guns, 4 soldiers manning them, ammunition boxes behind them. They had dug themselves a solid position. Their weak point was the supply path behind them. He committed every detail to memory, as if it were a photograph. The mission was a success. Now, all that remained was the return journey, a journey as perilous, perhaps even more so, than the arrival. The return is always harder. Adrenaline gives way to exhaustion. Concentration wanes. Ali's cheerful, hopeful demeanor was gone, replaced by the cold reality of war that had seeped into his bones. He was less careful. It was then that a sound would change everything, absolutely everything. While retreating, Ali's foot snagged on something under the loose earth, a wire tied to empty tin cans, a simple but effective trip alarm. The metallic clatter echoed in the silence of the night like a cannon blast. Instantly, a searchlight beam ignited, bathing their position in a hellish glow. A shout in English came from the Anzac trench. "Halt! Who goes there?" Then bullets began to sing around them. They both threw themselves into the nearest shell crater, but it was too late. As he fell into the crater, Ali groaned in pain. "Brother," he whispered, "I'm hit. My leg. I can't move." A bullet had shattered Ali's leg just below the knee. Blood was seeping from his trousers, mixing with the muddy earth. You will feel a chill when you understand this detail of the story. Ali was not just wounded, he was immobilized and unable to remain silent. The pain was clouding his consciousness, causing uncontrollable moans to escape his lips. To carry him in this state was suicide. The enemy patrol had left their trench and was now approaching, methodically checking the craters with the help of the searchlight. The sound of their boots crushing gravel and dry twigs was like the steps of an executioner approaching a condemned man. Mehmet clamped his palm over Ali's mouth. Ali's eyes, wide with fear and pain, shone in the moonlight. The vibrant young man who had just been describing his fiancée and his wedding under the plane tree was now thrashing helplessly like a sacrificial lamb. It was in that moment that the wall of silence Mehmet had built for years shattered within his conscience. A trial was convened in his mind. As the listener, ask yourself, what would you do if you were there, in that crater? Would you try to save the precious intelligence that could save hundreds of lives, or the life of the man you considered a brother, the man who reminded you of hope? This was the thin, bloody line between being a hero and a monster.
The grunts and steps of the Anzac soldiers were now just a few feet away. The beam of a flashlight swept over the edge of their crater. They could be discovered at any second. Lightning bolts of thought flashed through Mehmet's brain. His logic, his cold, calculating side, spoke with brutal clarity. Ali is dying. He will die if you leave him, and he will die if they capture him. But if he is captured, he might talk. If you are both captured, the mission fails, and all those brave men will die in vain. Is one life more precious than hundreds? Silence him, for the homeland. But his heart,
The heart he had silenced for years screamed in rebellion as he looked into Ali's eyes. His mind echoed with Ali's voice. "I'll invite you too, brother. You'll have the seat of honor." The image of Aisha's gazelle-like eyes from the photograph materialized. This was Ali, the only son of his mother in Konya. Ali who reminded him of hope, of his own humanity. How could he do it? How could he extinguish the breath of his dear friend with his own hands? His hand, covering Ali's mouth, began to tremble. Ali saw the horrific dilemma, the hell in Mehmet's eyes. He understood what his friend was thinking, what he might be forced to do. Tears streamed silently from his eyes. But then that helplessness, that sacrificial state was suddenly replaced by a steely resolve. This was the final decision of an Anatolian boy who had come to die for his country. With a final burst of strength, forgetting all his pain, he bit Mehmet's palm. His teeth sunk into the flesh. As Mehmet pulled his hand back with a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain, Ali did the most heroic and most insane thing he could do. Ignoring the agony in his leg, he grabbed a large rock beside him and hurled it with all his might out of the crater, in the opposite direction from where the patrol was. At the same instant, with the last air in his lungs, he screamed. It was not a word, just a primal cry to draw the enemy's attention. The searchlight and all the weapons immediately swung towards the sound and the rock. After a moment of silence, that spot turned into hell. Machine guns, rifles, all of them opened fire, raking the area. In that split second, Ali had decided that the mission and his friend's life were more important than his own. He had sacrificed himself. Mehmet was frozen, stunned by his friend's final act. As the Anzacs focused their fire in that direction, Mehmet had a few seconds to escape. As Ali's lifeless body, riddled with bullets, slumped on top of him, time stood still for Mehmet. That crater was now a grave.
But Mehmet was no longer just a hero. He was a bearer of secrets. From that day on, his silence deepened, became darker. It was no longer just a temperament, but a vow. It was the silence of a life bought by his friend's sacrifice, the silence of a secret to be carried for a lifetime. At night, he would sit alone in the darkest corner of the trench, clutching a small dirt and blood-stained amulet in his palm, the one Ali had given him the day before, saying, "It brings good luck, brother. My fiancée gave it to me." He was the ghost of Gallipoli, and his soul remained in that trench that night beside his friend who died a hero. He had nothing left to say. He felt that if he spoke, he would be betraying Ali's final cry.